We face division in every part of our lives, within ourselves, within our relationships, and in our work. But it doesn't have to be that way. To live fully, we must integrate all that God has made us to be with the work He has given us to do. This is My Boulevard's Integrate podcast, helping churches, nonprofits, and everyday Christians identify the divisions holding them back and giving them tools to make lasting change.
Welcome to My Boulevard's Integrate podcast, where we talk about the 7 core components of integrated disciple making. Today I'm here with Amisho Baraka. And what are we going to talk about today?
Today we're talking about part 2 of multicultural discipleship, but it's the pros and cons.
Yes, and I think that this is important because last time we just simply talked about the multi-ethnic, multicultural, and just some of the principles and even the importance of it and the hindrances. But let's talk about today the pros and the cons of it, because we are always there's a lot of talk and a lot of chatter around needing to be around people who look like you, talk like you, and act like you, so that you don't, for a lot of different reasons. Right. So let's just talk about that. What are your thoughts about cross-cultural, multi-ethnic disciple making? Just general thoughts.
General thoughts is that in America, it's inevitable. One, because of the diversity in which we live in this nation. It's impossible to be planted, to be dropped off in anywhere. I don't care if you're in Atlanta. I don't care if you're in Montana. You're going to, now, you asked me cross-cultural, right? Mm-hmm. So no matter where you go, you're going to have to engage with people who have different views of culture than you do. Now, there are places that probably have more uniformity in how they think, and that's fine. But the reality of it is because we're a federal institute, you're still going to have to understand how other people think, because those thoughts are going to affect you. And so even if it's not in proximity, you got to figure out, well, lawmakers are instilling on us these ideas. So what does that mean? So you have to, in every shape or form, you have to engage. Just as Jesus is interrupting not only Jewish thought, right, but he's also influencing or trying to undo Greek philosophy and ideology in a context of a Roman government. And so even if he's only discipling Jews, you're still dealing with 3 different types of contexts. Mm-hmm. And similarly, we have to deal with context no matter where we are. We got to deal with those types of influences. So that's the general, just no matter who you are, no matter where you are, it is inevitable. You have to be a student of the times. All
right. So dealing with this inevitability, then we need to understand what are the pros and the cons so that we can be better at disciple making. Right. And so let's just start off with the cons and let's end with some pros, right? Because we can end with on a positive note. One thing, what are some of the cons of disciple making?
My first con is just assimilation. Oftentimes, disciple making isn't growing people in Jesus; it's transforming people into some sort of cultural assimilation. And oftentimes, we've seen this in kind of like your mission work and your mission evangelism, where. And there's a long quote by a theologian that I love, a Kenyan theologian, John S. Mbidi, but he just talks about how mission Christianity is locked up in Sundays, and it doesn't teach you how to engage all of life. And Africans are confused by this type of religion because they, even from their pagan religions, their gods teach you how to engage everything. They're involved with everything, and this particular mission theology is just only engaged with a Sunday and maybe 2 hours throughout the week. And so that's just one example, but there are greater examples of how people are assimilated into a particular, once again, to stay within Africa, I remember going to Nigeria and visiting different churches. I visited maybe 4 churches speaking and performing and thinking their worship looks just like going to a big Black church in America. And I was like, why? Why? You guys are in a different country. You have so much history. Why do I hear Kirk Franklin? No hate on Kirk Franklin, but it's like you guys have your own style. And it's funny because even in secular music, there's a distinction. Like you have Afrobeats, you have this different rhythms, different types of drum. And in the church, it's like, no, we have to be assimilated to the greater Western culture. And it's just, so spent too much time. Assimilation is.
I love that. I love that. And I mean, when we talk about one of the 7 core components of an integrated leader, we talk about the idea of the feet, wherever is that context matters. And so what you're saying is assimilation is the number one thing that comes for you, which means there's a lack of contextualization, right? That is happening for being able to communicate in another person's heart's language, right? So that they can understand you and grow and all that. Because oftentimes, if I don't know, if your culture is not my heart's language culture, that is a con in the sense of like, even with me trying to become all things to all men, if I'm not fluent in your culture. But another thing that you said in there was compartmentalization, right? And especially in American Christianity, I just think that's across the board. Like we compartmentalize, our discipleship. And I think that is something that is important, because if I don't know your culture or your context, then I can only kind of talk about just this in a very generic way, because I don't really know how to make it real, or like the word becomes flesh in your context. But all I can do it is in my way. So there's a sense of compartmentalizing where I can only focus in on, as you mentioned, Sunday, or I can only focus in on like, what's the latest new book, and let's just read this book, And so I think that is another.
I have one that I don't think people talk about often, but I think is very prominent, is the best way I can communicate it is like insecurity. Because a black man may be I find it more, well, it's both in. Anybody who is not of that ethnicity going into a majority space, they can walk with an insecurity like, am I equipped to actually do this? And then what you end up doing is you walk with, you're passive, you're afraid to call out sin, you're afraid to speak to truth to the particular issues, because you think, well, I don't want to be culturally insensitive, or I don't. But the reality is sometimes the gospel, not sometimes, all of the time, the gospel transcends culture. Now, how you communicate that and how you apply that sometimes can be misappropriated. But that doesn't mean that you should not be able to speak truth to power, or speak truth to the cultural sins of or always sin, but just some of the methodology that may be misapplied in a particular context. And I've seen that, especially and it used to be black people being insecure in white spaces. I think now I feel like it's overwhelmingly white people in black spaces, because they feel like, well, can I say this? Can I call this out? Can I speak to this? Because I don't want to be considered a racist. And it's like, man, just say what you want to say. It may not be right, but just say it. You know what I mean? So anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that is spot on. The insecurities are so critical. I want to do one more, and then we go to the pros. Okay. Right. One more that I have is, for it can produce what you're saying, loneliness or isolation. I remember just like one of the things, and I still talk about it oftentimes, a part of why I'm doing what I do. And, I talk about a word and a phrase, about like this concept of like the last generation of leaving the urban context. And really, for me, it came out of my story. And in my story, I remember just like I was either around people who understood my context, but didn't have the commitment to theology and mission and even categories for discipleship, but they understood my context. Or I was around people who understood my commitment to theology and mission and disciple making, and they had the categories, but they didn't understand my context. And I felt like a third culture kid. And I was just like, man, no one gets me, right? No one is able to contextualize or speak in my heart's language. And like, who is that? And so for me, it was, so part of when I even think about, if I was a nuance, the last generation to leave the urban context, I can probably put a disclaimer, a last generation that was not raised in the local church. Right. Okay. The last generation that was not raised in the local church, to have to leave their context for discipleship, because oftentimes there is a strong church culture that we can make a whole argument that is cross-cultural, even now in the black community, right? For people who were not raised in the church, because there used to be a time when no matter what, you were raised in the church. But now there are times that we are not, many of us are not raised in the church and wouldn't put on that church culture as a predominant or influential culture in there, and it produces loneliness for those that has had a real encounter with Jesus to know. Because I remember, and it wasn't until I met Ambassador Deuce at the Impact Conference when I saw him talk about Jesus, that I was just like, because I was already on a trajectory to put on the church clothes, as it's been been stated, and it was just like, so it produced this loneliness, and it gave me for the first time to be able to express my Christianity in a way that was native to me.
Crossmove did the same. Well, actually, you guys did the same for me. The what were you guys called before?
Impact. Oh, move. Yeah, I remember coming out of high school and visiting you guys before I went to Tuskegee and being like, "Yo, y'all ain't lame," and then going to Impact and being like, "Okay, so Christians do they get down?" Okay, yeah.
So as we're gonna move to the pros, I have I'll just call it like a little sinew, a ligament that I think connects the pro and the con, and it's basically suffering. And often I'm in this new phase where I'm trying to study suffering, and I don't see it necessarily as a bad thing, because it develops, as James wanted, it draws us closer to the Lord. And when you are called, particularly to a place where you have to be a learner and sensitive and empathetic, you are going to suffer. It's going to be difficult, and sometimes it's going to feel very painful, but oftentimes once you get through that, you can consider it all joy. And so there is a pro in having to be amongst people who are not like you, because you're growing in empathy, you're growing in love, you're growing in sensitivity, and you're struggling well. And at the end of it, you're going to be like, man, I've learned so much.
Yeah.
So
I love
almost
that.
like this cultural exchange.
I love that. And this is what we was talking about a little bit earlier. We was just saying, like, here's the truth. You cannot take the struggle or the suffering out of disciple making. And as soon as you try to do that, you are actually short-circuiting the disciple making process. And so I just think that I love that biblically, like, it's all pro.
Yeah, absolutely.
But experientially,
the human side of it,
it's all con. So
there's nothing good about this.
There's nothing good. But I do, I do say oftentimes, right, cross culture is good from that vantage point because of homogeneous cultures hide homogeneous sins. Right. And it's the olfactory. Right. It's an olfactory fatigue. It's like when you walk into a room and you smell, man, it smells in here when you first walk into the room. Right. But then after a while, the smell went away. Yeah. And then you don't realize that the smell actually didn't go away. You just got used to that smell until the next person comes in. It's like, what's that smell? And you're just like, oh, I thought it went away. No, you just got used to it. The only way you can find out is if somebody else enters into the room that's not used to the smell, or you leave that room, get some fresh air, and then come back into the room to rediscover that the smell is. And I think sometimes the cross-cultural nature brings about that. So I would say that is a pro, right? Cross-cultural brings about the homogeneous sins that we have accepted within our culture.
You got some other ones?
You got.
I do. I mean, this is my militancy is coming out. I think I want. That's it. That's all I got.
Well, I mean,
I don't know if the last one. I kind of mentioned it, so I'll just say this is a con. I do think there is something beautiful about learning other people's culture. Just the cultural exchange. That idea of once you engage, because I kind of mentioned this in the suffering one, but just the idea of just being a part of people's culture and learning it and experiencing it. And it may be a little bit of what you said in the homogeneous exposure, but I think it's a beautiful thing, and it makes you a better student of the world. It makes you a better student of your own culture, because once you begin to engage, you get to see like, I'll never forget when I shared this story multiple times when I went to a brother's house. We were working on a musical, and a Christian brother, and he was like, yeah, man, my family and we have a tradition on Sundays and what we eat. So we went to the store, and I'm with him, and he's grabbing crackers and cheeses and like these small little pieces of like meats, and like olives and stuff. I'm like, what is this, brother?
Is that like charcuterie boards before charcuterie boards was
it wasn't charcuterie boards. And I was like, what are we about to have communion for dinner, bro? Like, what is this? And he's like, no, it's a charcuterie board. And I was like, I don't know what a charcuterie board.
I never heard of that. Yeah.
And so, but it was one of the most amazing things I've ever had. But I was like, we could do this at my house. I tried to do it one Sunday, and my wife was like, what are you doing?
You wasted our money.
Exactly. That's basically.
You better go get that money back.
It was me and Zoe. That was it. Just
eating crackers. It was just crackers. It was just like our charcuterie board is Ritz crackers. So anyway. No, I think that's good. A couple more. One, I would say, kind of in there, is the beauty of perspective, right? The beauty of perspective, the nuance. Look, one of my favorite movies that is not the movie, but it's the perspective of the movie is Vantage Point, yeah. Which I just think that is such a beautiful picture of what cross-cultural disciple can look like, is this the different vantage point. I'll use an example, like for us, like we're more celebratory in our worship, right? And just experiential in our worship, where another culture may be more intellectual or philosophical about their culture. Or, I remember even going to Honduras, and in Honduras, and I remember it's like, man, I'm coming here as a missionary to teach them, but here's the truth. I was like, I'm learning more from them because they're teaching me more about my faith than than anything, and that's the thing. And I think that's the beauty, is that when we understand that posture, that we recognize that true humility is that I got stuff to give, but also got stuff to receive. And I think cross-cultural, there is a symbiotic, and that was my second one. There's a symbiotic discipleship relationship that you come in, which it could also can be in the homogeneous, but. Yeah. But you can come in both as a teacher and learner, right? It's just like I got stuff to give, but also got stuff to learn. Yeah. In any cross-cultural relationship, whether I'm mentoring or menteeing, or being a mentee, like I have both grown in both ways, that I've given stuff, but I've also learned, from it. And I think that's what cross-cultural disciple making an advantage to it.
So my last one would be, it just displays the heart of God's intention of just showing off his manifold wisdom, the beauty of the church, and just great reconciliation. The potential, like, it is easy. Yes, I don't want to say it's easy. It is not as impressive to walk into a space and to see people who are all similar having a good time. Like you would expect that. But to walk into a space where people are different, and despite those differences, they find joy, fellowship, and unity. That's impressive. We see that in Acts. And so the people were amazed, and it's like, what in the world is happening here? Right. And I think there's the pro of discipling cross-culture is to be able to see and display God's beautiful intention for reconciliation. Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. And again, this week you get a chance to minister and be around other individuals that are making disciples in majority, minority, multi-ethnic spaces. It's what we call the My Boulevard Integrate Conferences on October the 19th to the 21st. If you haven't already seen it yet, you will notice that we have a special Labor Day week sale where it's 50% off for this week from the 14th all the way through the 19th, that Saturday, that you have the ability to the 4th through the 9th. From the 4th through the 9th, you have the ability to join the conference at half off. And so that's something that you want to be a part of.
Yep. Take advantage of that, my friends. Take advantage of that. Thank you for listening.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to My Boulevard's Integrate podcast. Be sure to visit us online at myboulevard.co. That's myboulevard.co. Or follow us on social media to stay updated on all things My Boulevard.